A man in his 90s stepped into the restaurant, his movements slow but steady. He wore a well-worn jacket, jeans, and an old pair of boots, clothes that stood out in the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses. The moment he walked in, a few diners threw him sideways glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Behind the counter, a young waitress named Lisa rolled her eyes. She had been working at this high-end restaurant for over a year, and she had seen all kinds of people walk through those doors. The wealthy regulars, the Hollywood elites, and the occasional tourist who clearly couldn't afford the menu. But this old man? He looked like he had wandered in from a ranch somewhere, out of place in a restaurant where a single meal cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She sighed dramatically and walked over to his table. "Sir, are you lost?" she asked, forcing a polite smile, but her tone carried a slight edge. The man chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I think I'll have dinner." Lisa hesitated for a second, then reached for a menu. "Just so you know," she said, "this isn't your average diner. It's a fine dining restaurant. The cheapest dish here is about $70. The old man looked up at her, his eyes twinkling with amusement. $70, huh? Well, I'll have the steak, medium rare." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And to drink?" "Just water," he said with a nod. She barely concealed another eye roll as she scribbled down the order. "Sure thing," she muttered before turning away. As she passed by another server, she smirked. "He's gonna choke when he sees the bill." The other waitress laughed under her breath. "Maybe he thinks they got a senior discount." Lisa giggled. "I swear, some people have no idea where they are." She disappeared into the kitchen, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Across the restaurant, the manager, a well-dressed man in his 50s, had just stepped out of his office when his eyes landed on the old man. The moment he saw him, his face went pale. His heart skipped a beat. "Oh my God," he whispered, feeling his throat tighten. Dropping the clipboard he was holding, he hurried toward the table. His legs moved faster than his mind could process. His breath was shallow, his palms sweating. Lisa, still chatting with her coworker, noticed the commotion. Her brows knitted together as she saw her manager practically running toward the old man's table. "What's his problem?" she mumbled, watching the scene unfold. Then, the moment that changed everything happened. The manager reached the table and stopped abruptly, standing up straight as if in the presence of royalty. "Mr. Eastwood," he said breathlessly, his voice filled with both respect and nervousness. I didn't know you were coming." Silence. Lisa's stomach dropped. She blinked, her mind racing. "Mr. Eastwood? No. It couldn't be." She turned her head slowly, staring at the old man again, really looking at him for the first time. The lined face, the sharp blue eyes, the unmistakable presence. A wave of horror washed over her. The man she had just mocked was Clint Eastwood. And then, it got worse. Her manager swallowed hard and spoke again, but this time, his voice was filled with something even heavier, something that made Lisa's breath hitch. I'll let the staff know right away. After all, you own the place." Lisa's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs wobbled as reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She had just mocked Clint Eastwood. Not only a Hollywood legend, but the man who owned the very restaurant she worked in. Lisa stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her head, "You own the place." Clint Eastwood, the man she had just mocked, was not just a customer. He was the owner. A wave of panic surged through her chest, making her hands tremble. She had been in trouble before, sure, she had mouthed off to difficult customers, complained about long shifts, and even gotten a warning for her sarcasm. But this? This was different. She had just disrespected the very man who could decide her entire future at this restaurant. She felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stay upright. Swallowing hard, she watched as her manager leaned in slightly toward Clint, his voice full of nervous energy. I sincerely apologize, sir. Had we known you were coming, we would have. Clint held up a hand, silencing him. No need for a fuss, he said calmly. His voice was deep, steady, and unreadable. I just came for a meal. Lisa's heart pounded against her ribcage. His tone wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling or demanding to fire her on the spot. But that didn't comfort her, it made her more nervous. She had seen angry customers before. They huffed and puffed, yelled at the staff, and left bad reviews. Those were predictable. But this? This was something entirely different. Clint took a sip of his water, as if completely unbothered by the tension hanging in the air. The manager, however, was sweating through his expensive shirt. Of course, sir. Anything you need, just let us know, he said quickly. Then, with a sharp glance at Lisa, he motioned for her to follow him. Lisa's stomach twisted into knots. She shuffled after her manager, dreading what was coming next. He didn't say a word until they were near the kitchen, out of Clint's earshot. Then, he turned on her, his face pale but furious. What were you thinking? He hissed, keeping his voice low but firm. Lisa's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her manager shook his head, rubbing his temples. Do you have any idea who that is? Clint Eastwood isn't just a Hollywood legend, he's the reason this restaurant exists. He invested in it years ago, and he still comes by now and then. But he doesn't make a scene. He doesn't demand special treatment. He just walks in like any other guest. And you, he pointed a finger at her, eyes dark with frustration, just treated him like some bum off the street. Lisa swallowed hard, shame creeping up her neck. I didn't know, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the problem, her manager shot back. You don't think before you act. Lisa wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say that she was overworked, tired, and frustrated. That she had dealt with so many difficult customers that she had stopped caring. But she knew none of that mattered. This wasn't just some random customer. This was Clint Eastwood. What do I do? She asked weakly. The manager sighed, glancing toward the dining area. Clint was still at his table, calmly eating his steak as if nothing had happened. First, you're going to go back out there and serve him properly, the manager said firmly. Then, you're going to pray that he doesn't fire you on the spot. Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat, but she nodded. With slow, hesitant steps, she made her way back to Clint's table. Every step felt like she was walking toward her own execution. When she reached him, she cleared her throat softly. Sir, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, is there anything else I can get you? Clint looked up at her. His piercing blue eyes held no anger, no resentment. Just quiet observation. Lisa clenched her hands together, feeling small under his gaze. Everything's fine, he said simply. Then, after a brief pause, he added, but I have a question for you. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Why yes, sir? Clint set down his fork and leaned back slightly in his chair. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. Lisa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, she knew why. She had taken one look at him, his old jacket, his jeans, his boots, and decided he wasn't important. She had judged him the way she had judged so many other people who walked into this restaurant, not looking the part of the rich and powerful. I don't know, she mumbled, looking down. Clint didn't press her. He simply nodded, as if he had already known the answer. Lisa stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. Then, to her surprise, Clint gave her a small smile. Just something to think about, he said. Lisa felt her face burn with embarrassment. She wanted to run, to disappear, to take back every smug comment she had made. But it was too late. All she could do now was think. Lisa could barely breathe as she turned away from Clint's table. The weight of his words sat heavy on her chest. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? The question echoed in her mind, louder than the chatter of the restaurant, louder than the clinking of silverware against fine china. She had no answer, at least, not one she was proud of. Lisa could barely breathe as she turned away from Clint's table. The weight of his words sat heavy on her chest. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? The question echoed in her mind, louder than the chatter of the restaurant, louder than the clinking of silverware against fine china. She had no answer, at least, not one she was proud of. Her hands trembled as she reached the service station. She grabbed a glass and filled it with water, hoping the cool liquid would settle the storm brewing inside her. But it didn't. Her reflection in the polished metal of the counter showed wide, nervous eyes. She had messed up. Badly. She stole a glance at Clint's table. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was calmly finishing his steak, unbothered, unshaken. Meanwhile, she felt like she was falling apart. Lisa, a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to see her manager standing beside her. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. Come to my office when you finish with Mr. Eastwood's table, he said before walking away. Lisa felt her stomach lurch. This was it. She was going to be fired. She forced herself to keep moving, to keep serving other tables, but her heart wasn't in it. Each polite smile she gave felt fake, each enjoy your meal sounded hollow. All she could think about was how foolish she had been, how quickly she had judged someone based on their appearance. Minutes stretched into eternity, but eventually, Clint Eastwood set down his fork and wiped his mouth with his napkin. He placed his knife carefully on the plate, then took one last sip of water. Lisa took a deep breath and approached his table. Did you enjoy your meal, sir? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Clint looked up at her, his blue eyes steady. It was great, he said simply. Lisa hesitated, then gathered the courage to say, I just want to apologize, sir. For earlier. Clint tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. What are you apologizing for? Lisa swallowed. For assuming things about you. For treating you differently than I should have. Clint didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, his gaze thoughtful. Finally, he said, you ever make a mistake before? Lisa blinked at the unexpected question. Yes, she admitted softly. Clint nodded. So have I. So has everyone. He tapped his fingers on the table. The real question is, what are you gonna do about it? Lisa's breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to be this calm, this forgiving. I don't know, she admitted. Clint held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and placed them on the table. It was more than enough to cover the bill, plus a generous tip. He stood, straightening his jacket. Think about it, he said. Then, with a small nod, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Lisa watched him go, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. He hadn't yelled at her. He hadn't demanded she be fired. But somehow, his silence, his calmness, felt even heavier than anger. She turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, where her manager was waiting. Lisa knocked lightly on the manager's office door, then stepped inside. Her manager sat behind his desk, arms crossed. He didn't look furious, but he wasn't smiling either. Close the door, he said. Lisa obeyed. The manager sighed, rubbing his temples. Lisa, do you understand how big of a mistake you made tonight? She nodded, her throat tight. Yes. I do. Clint Eastwood isn't just some Hollywood icon, he continued. He's one of the most respected men in this town. He built his career from the ground up, worked harder than most people can imagine. And tonight, you looked at him, and thought he wasn't good enough to be here. Lisa lowered her gaze, shame burning in her chest. Her manager exhaled, then leaned forward. You're lucky, you know that? Lisa frowned slightly. Lucky? The manager nodded. If he had wanted to, he could have fired you on the spot. One word from him, and you'd be out that door. Lisa swallowed hard. She had expected this conversation to end with her losing her job. But he didn't, the manager said. You know why? Lisa shook her head. The manager leaned back in his chair. Because Clint Eastwood believes in second chances. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. The manager studied her for a long moment, then said, You're a good waitress, Lisa. You work hard. But your attitude, it's got to change. This isn't just about tonight. It's about the way you treat people. Lisa felt her stomach twist. She knew he was right. She had been bitter for months, snapping at customers, rolling her eyes, making fun of those who didn't fit her idea of rich or important. She had thought she was just being tough, just protecting herself from the stress of the job. But in reality, she had been mean. Her manager sighed again. Look, I'm not firing you. Lisa's head snapped up. You're not? No. But this is your wake-up call. He paused, then added, I want you to prove that you can be better than this. That you can learn from tonight. Lisa swallowed, then nodded. I will, she said, her voice firm. Her manager gave her a long look, then nodded. Good. Now get back to work. Lisa stood and walked out of the office, her heart still racing. As she stepped back onto the restaurant floor, she felt different. She had walked into work that evening, thinking she was just another waitress, stuck in a job she didn't care about. But now? Now she had a choice. She could keep being the same bitter, judgmental person she had been. Or she could change. For the first time in a long time, Lisa felt something stir inside her. A desire to be better. To be someone she could be proud of. And it had all started because of one man. Clint Eastwood. The next few days at the restaurant felt different for Lisa. Every time she walked past the table where Clint Eastwood had sat, she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and something else, something deeper. Regret. She had spent so much time assuming, judging, and thinking she had people figured out just by looking at them. But Clint's words stayed with her. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? It wasn't just about Clint Eastwood. It was about how she had been treating people for years. She noticed it now, how she rolled her eyes when an elderly couple struggled to read the menu, how she sighed when someone asked too many questions, how she barely paid attention to customers unless they looked rich or important. It made her stomach twist. But what could she do? She couldn't erase what happened. She couldn't take back the way she had treated Clint Eastwood. All she could do was change. And so, she tried. She started small. When an older man came in wearing a worn-out jacket similar to Clint's, Lisa made a conscious effort not to judge him. She greeted him with a warm smile and took his order with genuine kindness. When a young couple hesitated over the menu, looking unsure, she didn't sigh impatiently. Instead, she knelt slightly and explained the dishes to them with patience. She noticed how people's faces softened when they were treated with care. She noticed how good it felt to make someone's dining experience a little better. And for the first time in a long time, she actually enjoyed her job. One evening, about a week after Clint's visit, Lisa was finishing up a shift when the manager approached her. You got a minute? He asked. Lisa wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. Yeah. He led her toward the back of the restaurant, stopping near the manager's office. She braced herself, expecting another warning. Instead, he folded his arms and studied her for a moment. I've noticed a change in you, he said. Lisa blinked. You have? He nodded. You're different lately. More patient. More respectful. He paused. You seem to actually care about the customers. Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't know what to say. The manager sighed, running a hand over his face. Listen, I didn't know if you were gonna take what happened last week seriously. I figured you'd either quit or go back to your old ways. But you didn't. Lisa swallowed. I just... I realized I was wrong, she admitted. And I didn't want to be that person anymore. The manager studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. Lisa frowned. What's that? He handed it to her. Tip from a customer. Lisa hesitated, then slowly took the envelope. It felt thick. Confused, she opened it and gasped. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills. Her heart pounded as she pulled out a small note tucked inside. It had only 4 words. Keep being better. See. Lisa's breath hitched. She looked up at her manager, her hands shaking slightly. Clint Eastwood left this? The manager nodded. He called earlier. Said he wanted to leave you something. Didn't want a big deal made of it. Lisa stared at the note, her vision blurring slightly. Clint hadn't just walked out of her life after that night. He had been watching. Checking to see if she had learned her lesson. And now, he was rewarding her for it. Lisa clenched the note in her hands, her chest tight with emotion. She had spent so much time thinking she was above this job, acting like she was better than the people she served. But the truth was, she had learned one of the biggest lessons of her life here. A lesson taught to her by the last person she had expected. A man who didn't look like he belonged, but did more than anyone else. She took a deep breath and looked up at her manager. I won't waste it, she said softly. And for the first time in years, she meant it. That night, Lisa sat at her small apartment's kitchen table, staring at the envelope Clint Eastwood had left for her. The crisp bills still felt unreal in her hands, but it wasn't the money that left her feeling shaken. It was the meaning behind it. Keep being better. She traced the words with her fingers, her mind racing. Clint hadn't owed her anything. In fact, she had expected the opposite: anger, punishment, maybe even a call to fire her. But instead, he had given her a lesson. A second chance. Lisa had never had a second chance before. She had grown up believing that life didn't wait for mistakes. That if you messed up, you were on your own. She had learned that the hard way, bouncing between jobs, struggling to keep up with rent, constantly feeling like she was running just to stay in place. But now? For the first time in her life, someone had seen her, not just as a waitress with a bad attitude, but as a person capable of change. And she wasn't going to waste that. The next morning, Lisa walked into the restaurant earlier than usual. She felt different, more focused, more determined. As she tied her apron around her waist, she caught her reflection in the polished glass of the restaurant's front door. She looked lighter. Maybe it was the extra sleep she had gotten, or maybe it was the weight of guilt finally lifting off her shoulders. Either way, she felt better. And it showed. Throughout the day, she worked harder than ever, not just to serve food but to connect with the people she was serving. She made conversation with the regulars, checked on tables more often, and even helped the new waitress navigate the complicated menu. She didn't roll her eyes when an older woman asked to split a dish 3 ways. She didn't sigh when a father had trouble calming his crying toddler. Instead, she cared. She had spent so much time assuming this job was beneath her, but now she saw it for what it really was: an opportunity to make someone's day just a little bit better. And the customers noticed. A week ago, Lisa had been just another waitress, half ignored and half tolerated. But now? She saw the difference in the way people smiled at her. The way they thanked her, genuinely. Even the manager, who had always been stern with her, gave her an approving nod when he passed by. But the biggest surprise came later that afternoon. Lisa was clearing a table near the window when the hostess approached her. "Hey, Lisa," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's someone at table 7 asking for you." Lisa frowned. "Me?" The hostess nodded. "Yeah. He asked for you by name." Lisa wiped her hands on her apron and glanced toward table 7. And her breath caught in her throat. Sitting there, dressed in another simple jacket and jeans, was Clint Eastwood. Her heart pounded. She hadn't expected to see him again. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself and walked toward his table. "Mr. Eastwood," she said carefully. "It's nice to see you again." Clint looked up at her, his signature calm expression in place. "You remember me, huh?" Lisa gave a small, nervous laugh. "I think it'd be impossible to forget." Clint nodded, as if satisfied with that answer. "Good." She stood there awkwardly for a moment, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit," he said. Lisa hesitated. I'm on shift." Clint raised an eyebrow. "I don't think your manager will mind." Lisa glanced toward the counter, where her manager stood watching. He gave her a small nod. Taking a deep breath, she slid into the chair. Clint leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "Tell me something, Lisa. How's work been?" Lisa blinked at the question. "It's been different," she admitted. Clint nodded. "I noticed." Lisa frowned. "You noticed?" Clint gave her a knowing look. "I have my ways." Lisa sat back in her chair, processing that. Had he been checking in on her? Watching from a distance? The idea sent a strange warmth through her chest. "I see a change in you," Clint continued. "Not just in the way you work, but in the way you carry yourself." Lisa swallowed, feeling suddenly vulnerable. I guess I just realized I didn't want to be the kind of person who judged others so quickly." Clint studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good answer." Lisa hesitated before speaking again. "Mr. Eastwood, why did you come back?" A small smile touched his lips. "Wanted to see if you meant what you said." Lisa looked down at her hands, guilt creeping in again. "I really am sorry for how I treated you that night." "I know," Clint said simply. "And I forgave you the moment it happened." Lisa's head snapped up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You did?" Clint shrugged. "I've been in this town a long time, Lisa. I've met people who judge, people who assume, people who don't give others a chance. Most of them never change." He tapped his fingers on the table. "But you did." Lisa felt her throat tighten. "I'm trying." Clint nodded. "That's all that matters." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Clint reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table toward her. Lisa hesitated before picking it up and unfolding it. Her eyes widened. It was a job offer. Not as a waitress, but as an assistant manager. Lisa's head shot up, her mouth slightly open. What is this?" Clint leaned back, watching her reaction. "An opportunity," he said simply. "The question is, are you ready to take it?" Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent so much of her life stuck, going from job to job, never moving forward. But now, Clint Eastwood was offering her something she never thought she'd get. A second chance. A real one. Lisa stared at the paper, her hands shaking slightly. And then, she looked up at Clint. She knew her answer. And this time, she wasn't going to let doubt or fear hold her back. This time, she was ready. Lisa's fingers tightened around the job offer, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She looked up at Clint Eastwood, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of joke. But there was none. His expression remained calm, serious, and unwavering. This is real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clint nodded. "As real as it gets." Lisa swallowed hard, her throat dry. Assistant manager. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a career. A step forward. A chance to prove that she was more than just a waitress who had once made a terrible mistake. But doubt crept in, clinging to her like a shadow. "Why me?" she blurted. Clint raised an eyebrow. "Why not you?" Lisa exhaled sharply. Because I messed up. I judged you. I treated you terribly. And now you're offering me a better job? Clint leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Lisa, do you think the best people never make mistakes? She hesitated. No, but nothing. Clint shook his head. I'm not offering you this job because of what you did wrong that night. I'm offering it because of what you did after. Lisa stared at him. Clint continued, his voice steady. You could have ignored that moment. You could have stayed the same, kept treating people the way you did before. But you didn't. You made the choice to change, to grow. And that's what matters. Lisa's chest tightened. Had she really changed that much? The past week had felt different, sure. She had been more patient, more understanding. She had stopped assuming the worst in people. But could that really be enough to make someone like Clint Eastwood see potential in her? I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted. Clint studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Let me tell you something, he said. Nobody ever feels ready. Not at first. But the ones who succeed? They step up anyway. Lisa swallowed. Clint's eyes locked onto hers. So, Lisa, are you ready to step up? She looked down at the offer in her hands, her mind racing. This was it. A turning point. A week ago, she had been stuck, drowning in bitterness, blaming the world for where she was. And now, she had a choice. She could say no. She could stay comfortable, keep doing what she knew, keep avoiding risk. Or she could say yes. She could step into the unknown. Take a chance on herself the way Clint was taking a chance on her. Lisa took a deep breath. Then she looked Clint Eastwood in the eye. I'll do it, she said. A slow, approving smile spread across his face. Good, he said. Lisa's pulse quickened. This was happening. She was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Lisa. Her shift as a waitress continued as usual, but now, something was different. She was no longer just serving food and clearing tables, she was watching, learning, and preparing for what came next. Becoming an assistant manager wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility. And Lisa was determined to prove that Clint Eastwood hadn't made a mistake in choosing her. On her first official day in the new role, Lisa arrived at the restaurant an hour earlier than usual. The place was quiet, with only a few kitchen staff prepping for the morning rush. She took a deep breath, smoothing out the new black button-up shirt she had been given. It felt strange not wearing her usual waitress apron, but it also felt good. She walked toward the manager's office, where her current boss, Greg, was waiting for her. Greg had been managing the restaurant for years. He was strict, efficient, and had little patience for mistakes. Lisa had always thought he disliked her, but now, as she stood before him, she realized that maybe he had just been waiting for her to take things seriously. Lisa, he said, nodding toward a chair. Take a seat. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Greg leaned back in his chair. I won't sugarcoat this, being an assistant manager isn't easy. It's more than just taking orders and handling customers. You'll be dealing with schedules, inventory, and staff issues. People will rely on you. And if you mess up, it won't just affect you, it'll affect the entire team. Lisa nodded. I understand. Greg studied her for a moment. I'll admit, I didn't see this coming. A month ago, I would have never imagined you in this position. Lisa felt a familiar sting of guilt. She knew exactly what he meant. But, Greg continued, I've seen the change in you. And if Clint Eastwood believes in you, then I'm willing to give you a shot too. Lisa swallowed hard. Thank you. I won't let you down. Greg gave a small, approving nod. Let's see if you mean that. Follow me. The first few hours of Lisa's new role were overwhelming. She had spent years thinking management just meant bossing people around, but she quickly realized how wrong she had been. Within the first hour, she had to calm down an angry customer whose reservation had been lost. Help a server figure out why their food orders weren't going through. Step in when two kitchen staff started arguing over missing ingredients. And that was before lunch even started. By the time the noon rush hit, Lisa was exhausted. She barely had time to breathe as she ran between tables, checking on customers, helping staff, and making sure everything was running smoothly. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. What if I can't do this? What if Clint made a mistake picking me? But then, something happened. Lisa saw one of the younger waitresses struggling with a difficult table. The customers were complaining about their food being cold, demanding replacements, and snapping at the poor girl every time she spoke. Lisa didn't even think, she stepped in. "Hi folks," she said smoothly, offering a warm smile. "I hear there's been a bit of an issue with your meals. Let me make this right for you." The customers turned to her, still irritated, but Lisa remained calm. Instead of arguing, she listened. Instead of brushing them off, she validated their concerns. And within minutes, she had not only fixed the problem but had also earned their respect. As the table finally settled down, the young waitress turned to Lisa with wide eyes. "Wow," she breathed. "How did you do that?" Lisa exhaled, realizing something. She had become the kind of leader she once ignored. The kind of person who didn't just look down on others, but helped them rise. And as she walked back to the counter, Clint's words echoed in her mind. Keep being better. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just someone stuck in a job she hated. She was becoming someone new. And this was only the beginning.